The blood on Penelope Warren's hands had long since dried, but she still scrubbed them raw in the creek water every morning as though the stain might finally disappear. It never did, not really, though the actual crimson had faded months ago when she buried her husband beside the trail outside Santa Fe. Now, in the autumn of 1882, she found herself in Deer Lodge, Montana Territory, a place so far from everything she had known that sometimes she wondered if she had died too, and this was some strange purgatory. The town squatted in a valley between mountains that turned purple at sunset, where the smell of pine mixed with wood smoke and horse manure. She had arrived 3 weeks prior with nothing but a carpet bag, her dead husband's pistol, and enough money to rent a small room above the general store for 2 months. After that, she would need to find work, though no respectable establishment would hire a woman alone, and the disreputable ones she would rather starve than enter. Her husband Thomas had been a gambler and a drunk, mean when sober and meaner when he was not. When the bullet found him in that saloon in Santa Fe, she had felt nothing but relief, a feeling that filled her with such guilt she could barely breathe. The men who killed him had not even looked at her twice. She was just another piece of furniture in the corner, another woman attached to a worthless man. She took what little he had and ran, buying a ticket on the first stage heading north, then another, and another, until the money dwindled and she found herself here in this mountain town where nobody knew her name or her shame. Trust was not something Penelope Warren possessed anymore. She had trusted her father when he arranged her marriage to Thomas, trusted that a man 10 years her senior would provide and protect. That trust had earned her 3 years of bruises hidden under long sleeves and a fear that lived in her bones. She was 22 now, and she would never trust again. This she had promised herself over Thomas's grave, where she had not bothered to mark the spot with so much as a stone. The general store where she rented her room needed someone to help with inventory, and she convinced the owner, a round German immigrant named Mr. Schneider, to let her work in exchange for extending her rent. He agreed reluctantly, making it clear that if any trouble followed her, she would be out on her ear. Penelope had nodded, kept her eyes down, and showed up before dawn the next morning ready to prove herself useful enough to keep. It was on her 4th day working in the store, counting tins of beans in the back room, that she first encountered Vincent Frost. She heard his voice before she saw him, a low rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. He was speaking to Mr. Schneider about an order of supplies, his words measured and polite, nothing like the rough barking she had grown accustomed to from most men in this territory. Curious despite herself, she peered around the doorframe. He stood with his back to her, tall enough that he had to duck slightly under the hanging pots Mr. Schneider kept suspended from the ceiling beams. His shoulders were broad beneath a worn brown coat, and his dark hair curled slightly at the collar. When he turned to gesture at something on the shelf, she caught a glimpse of his profile, a straight nose, a jaw dark with several days of stubble, and eyes that looked gray even in the dim light of the store. "Miss Warren," Mr. Schneider called, making her jump. "Bring out that list I left on the back table." She considered pretending she had not heard, but that would only make things worse. Smoothing her skirt, she retrieved the list and walked out into the main room, keeping her gaze fixed on Mr. Schneider as she handed it to him. "Thank you," the shopkeeper said, then turned to the tall man. "Vincent Frost, this is Miss Penelope Warren. She is helping me with the inventory. Miss Warren, Mr. Frost here has a ranch about an hour's ride north, one of my best customers." Penelope nodded once, still not meeting the cowboy's eyes, and turned to go back to the storeroom. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Warren," Vincent said. Something in his tone made her pause, some quality of genuine courtesy that she had not heard in a very long time. Against her better judgment, she glanced up at him. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 27 or 28, with those gray eyes that looked at her with simple acknowledgement. No leer, no assessment of her worth or availability. Just a man greeting another human being. "Mr. Frost," she said quietly, and fled back to her counting. She thought that would be the end of it. Men came and went in the store all day, and she had become adept at making herself invisible, just another part of the inventory. But Vincent Frost came back 2 days later, and then again 3 days after that, and she began to notice that his visits were more frequent than any rancher's supply needs could reasonably justify. He never approached her directly. He would conduct his business with Mr. Schneider, purchase whatever items he claimed to need, and leave. But she felt his eyes on her sometimes, not in the way that made her skin crawl, but with a watchfulness that unnerved her in a different way. She did not know what he wanted, and not knowing kept her on edge. The first time he spoke to her beyond that initial greeting was on a Saturday morning in late October. She was outside sweeping the storefront when a group of men on horseback rode past, drunk despite the early hour, whooping and firing their pistols into the air. Penelope pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering, memories of Thomas and his friends flooding back. The broom clattered from her hands. "You are safe." The voice came from beside her, and she jerked around to find Vincent Frost standing there, his horse tied to the rail. He had positioned himself between her and the street, not touching her but present solid. "They are just letting off steam. They will not bother anyone." "I know that," she said, but her voice shook. He nodded slowly. "Of course. My apologies." He bent and retrieved her broom, holding it out to her. When she did not immediately take it, he leaned it carefully against the wall within her reach. "Have a good day, Miss Warren." He walked into the store, leaving her standing there with her pulse still racing and a strange feeling in her chest that she could not name. After that, he began to offer small acts of assistance whenever their paths crossed. When she struggled with a heavy crate, he appeared to lift it without being asked and set it where she indicated before tipping his hat and walking away. When it rained and she had to make a delivery to the boarding house 3 streets over, she found a slicker hanging on the back door with a note in Mr. Schneider's handwriting saying Mr. Frost had left it for general use. When a drunk miner got belligerent in the store one afternoon, and Mr. Schneider was out, Vincent Frost happened to be there and stepped between them, speaking in that low, calm voice until the miner settled down and left. "You do not need to protect me," Penelope told him after the minor incident, her words sharp with the fear that was only now fading. "I can handle myself." "I am sure you can," Vincent replied, "but there is no shame in accepting help when it is offered freely, with no strings attached." "There are always strings," she said bitterly. He studied her for a long moment, and she saw something flicker in his gray eyes, something that looked like understanding. "Not this time, Miss Warren. You have my word for whatever that is worth to you." "Nothing," she said. "It is worth nothing." "I do not know you." "That is fair," he said, and left without another word. But he kept coming back, and his help continued, always quiet, never asking for thanks or acknowledgement. When the first snow fell in early November, and she discovered her single thin blanket was not enough to keep warm in her unheated room, she came back from work to find 2 thick wool blankets folded on her bed. Mr. Schneider claimed he found them in the storeroom and did not need them, but she saw the price tags had been torn off recently, and she knew she should have returned them. Instead, she wrapped herself in them that night and cried for the first time since leaving Santa Fe, not entirely sure why. November passed into December, and Vincent Frost became a regular fixture in her days. He never pushed, never demanded her time or attention, but he was there, steady as the mountains that ringed the valley. She learned things about him in fragments. He had come to Montana 5 years ago from Wyoming, bought a parcel of land that nobody else wanted because it was so remote, and built a ranch from nothing. He ran cattle, about 200 head, with the help of one hired hand, an older man named Carl who had a bad leg and needed steady work. Vincent came to town once or twice a week for supplies and to deliver beef to the butcher. He did not drink, did not gamble, and kept to himself mostly, though people in town seemed to respect him. "He is a good man," Mr. Schneider told her one day, unprompted. "I know you are cautious, Miss Warren, and I do not blame you for that. But Vincent Frost is the kind of man who does what he says he will do. That is rare." Penelope did not respond, but she thought about it. Winter settled hard over Deer Lodge, and the work in the store slowed as fewer people ventured out in the cold. Mr. Schneider started talking about maybe not needing her help come spring, and Penelope felt panic claw at her throat. She had nowhere else to go, no other prospects. She began taking in mending, sewing by candlelight in her room until her eyes burned, trying to save every penny. It was Vincent who noticed her fingers, cracked and bleeding from the needlework, when she handed him his change one afternoon. "You are hurting yourself," he said, frowning at her hands. "I am fine," she said automatically. "Miss Warren." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "My ranch needs someone to help with the domestic work, cooking, some cleaning, mending. Carl and we are not good at those things, and we are tired of our own bad cooking. The pay would be fair, and there is a small cabin on the property, separate from the main house, that you could live in. It has a good stove and proper insulation." She stared at him, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the real proposal to emerge from behind the respectable words. "You would be an employee," he continued, his eyes steady on hers. "Nothing more unless you decided you wanted to be. You would have your own space, your own lock on your door. I am offering you work, Miss Warren, honest work with no expectations beyond the job itself." "Why?" The word burst from her. "Why would you do this?" "Because you need it," he said simply. "And because I think you are someone who would rather earn her own way than accept charity." "This is not charity. I truly do need help, and you clearly need a better situation than what you have here." "You do not know anything about me," she said. "I know enough," he said. "I know you work hard and keep your word. I know you are honest and careful. That is enough for me." She wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to keep her distance, to never put herself in a position where she was dependent on a man again, especially one who lived an hour outside of town where no one would hear her scream. But the alternative was ending up on the street when Mr. Schneider let her go, and that was a different kind of danger, one that terrified her even more. "I will think about it," she said. "Take your time," Vincent said. "The offer stands." She thought about it for 3 days, barely sleeping, turning it over in her mind from every angle, looking for the trap. Finally, she went to the sheriff, a grizzled man named Tom Hendricks who had been in Deer Lodge for 20 years. "What do you know about Vincent Frost?" she asked him directly. Sheriff Hendricks leaned back in his chair and studied her. Planning to take him up on his job offer, so the whole town knew, she should have expected that. "Maybe. I want to know what kind of man he is." "The best kind," the sheriff said. "I have known Vincent for 5 years now, since he first came here. Never had a lick of trouble from him. He is honest in his dealings, pays his debts, helps his neighbors when they need it. Keeps to himself mostly, but he is not unfriendly. If he offered you work, Miss Warren, you could do a lot worse than accepting." "Does he have a woman?" she asked, hating how the question revealed her fear. "No," Hendricks said. "He keeps company with himself and Carl." I do not think I have ever seen him pay particular attention to any woman until you." He held up a hand when she stiffened. "Do not misunderstand me. I have watched him around you because it is my job to watch. He is careful not to crowd you, careful to be respectful. Whatever his interest, he is handling it like a gentleman. If he ever does not, you come tell me and I will handle it, but I do not think you will need to." She left the sheriff's office with her mind still spinning but something loosening in her chest. That night, she lay under the wool blankets Vincent had bought her and made her decision. The next day, she told him she would accept the job, starting in 2 weeks when Mr. Schneider closed the store for inventory. Vincent nodded, a small smile crossing his face that transformed him, making him look younger and unexpectedly warm. "Thank you, Miss Warren. I will come for you when you are ready." Those 2 weeks passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. She packed her few belongings, said goodbye to Mr. Schneider, who wished her well with what seemed like genuine kindness, and tried not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. On a cold morning in mid-December, Vincent arrived with a wagon, helped her load her carpet bag and a box of her sewing things, and drove her north out of town. The road wound through pine forests heavy with snow, past frozen creeks and clearings where deer watched them pass. She sat rigid on the seat beside him, hyper-aware of the space between them, of being alone with him for the first time. He did not try to fill the silence with chatter. He drove the wagon steadily, occasionally pointing out a landmark or a distant peak, his voice neutral and informative. After about 40 minutes, they turned onto a narrower track that climbed slightly, and then the forest opened up to reveal a valley ringed by mountains. The ranch was smaller than she expected, but well kept. The main house was a solid log structure with a stone chimney. A barn stood behind it with a corral attached, and off to the right, about 50 yards from the main house, sat a small cabin. Smoke rose from all the chimneys, and she could see cattle in a distant pasture, dark shapes against the white snow. "That is yours," Vincent said, pointing to the small cabin. "Carl checked it this morning, made sure the stove was going. It should be warm by now." He drove the wagon to the cabin and helped her down, then carried her things inside. The cabin was indeed warm, a single room with a bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a cooking stove that doubled as heat, and a chest of drawers. Simple but clean, with a window that looked out at the mountains. There was a rag rug on the floor and curtains on the window, both showing signs of having been recently washed. "The lock works," Vincent said, demonstrating it on the door. "This is your key. I do not have a copy. You can bar it from the inside too, see?" He showed her the heavy wooden bar that could be dropped into brackets. "You are safe here, Miss Warren. I give you my word." She took the key from him, their fingers not quite touching. "Thank you. The main house is just there if you need anything. Meals are usually at 7 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening, but we can adjust if that does not suit you. I will leave you to settle in. Come over whenever you are ready, and I will show you the kitchen and the rest." He left, closing the door behind him, and she stood in the middle of her new home, listening to the silence. It was not the oppressive silence of fear, but something else, something that felt almost like possibility. She unpacked her things, hanging her 2 dresses on pegs by the bed, storing her undergarments and sewing supplies in the drawers. She checked the lock 3 times, tested the bar twice, and finally sat on the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "You can do this," she told herself. "It is just a job. Just work." But she knew it was more than that, and the knowing terrified her. After about an hour, she forced herself to leave the cabin and walk to the main house. She knocked, waited, and heard Vincent call for her to enter. The inside of the house was much like the cabin. simple but well made, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living space, and two doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. A man she had not met sat at the table, older, with gray hair and a weathered face. He stood when she entered, leaning on a cane. "Miss Warren, this is Carl Thompson," Vincent said. "Carl, this is Miss Penelope Warren, who is going to save us from starvation." Carl smiled, crinkling his whole face. "Pleased to meet you, miss. Do not listen to Vincent. We have not starved yet, but we might have lost the will to live from boredom with our cooking." Despite herself, Penelope felt her mouth twitch in an almost smile. "I will do my best." Vincent showed her around the kitchen, explaining what supplies they had, what they needed, how they usually handled meals. He was organized, she noticed, everything in its place, nothing wasted. She asked questions, made mental notes, and gradually felt some of her tension ease. This was work she knew how to do. This, at least, she could control. "Carl and I usually eat together," Vincent said, "but you are welcome to take your meals in your cabin if you prefer, whatever makes you comfortable." "I will eat in the cabin," she said immediately. "Of course," Vincent said, without a trace of disappointment. "Just let us know how much to set aside for you." They worked out a routine that first day. She would come to the main house at 6 each morning to prepare breakfast, set aside a portion for herself, and leave it for Carl and Vincent to eat. Then she would clean up, do any mending or household tasks that needed doing, prepare lunch and dinner the same way, and return to her cabin. She would work 6 days a week, with Sundays off, and her pay would be delivered to her every Saturday evening, left in an envelope under her cabin door. "If you need anything from town," Vincent added, "just let me know and I will get it on my next trip. Or you are welcome to come with me if you prefer." She nodded, already planning to go with him. She would not be dependent on him for everything, would not give him that power. The first week passed in a careful dance of avoidance and routine. She cooked, cleaned, mended shirts, and scurried back to her cabin like a mouse to its hole whenever the work was done. Vincent and Carl were polite, thanking her for meals, leaving notes when they needed something specific. She saw Vincent mostly from a distance, working with the cattle or fixing a fence line. He waved sometimes and she would nod back, maintaining the safe space between them. But slowly, inevitably, the distance began to narrow. It started with small conversations, practical exchanges about whether they needed more flour, or if she should mend Carl's coat, or buy him a new one. Vincent would come in from the cold while she was cooking, warming his hands by the stove, and would mention that the cattle seemed restless, or that he had seen a mountain lion's tracks in the north pasture. She would listen, responding with single words at first, then gradually with questions or observations of her own. She learned that he had grown up in Wyoming, the youngest of 4 sons on a failing ranch. When his father died, the land went to the eldest brother, and Vincent struck out on his own, working as a ranch hand for 3 years before saving enough to buy this land. He had built the house and barn mostly by himself over 2 years. He loved the isolation, the self-sufficiency, the honest work of raising cattle and living close to the land. Carl had been a cowboy all his life, working ranches from Texas to Canada, until a horse fell on him and crushed his leg 5 years ago. Vincent found him in Deer Lodge, drinking away his last pennies, and offered him a job that did not require riding all day. Carl had been with him ever since, handling the daily chores close to the house while Vincent managed the range work. "He saved my life," Carl told her one afternoon when Vincent was out checking on the herd. "I was ready to give up, and he gave me a reason to keep going. He is like that, Vincent is. He sees when people need help and he helps them without making them feel small about it." "Is that what he is doing with me?" Penelope asked, unable to stop herself. "Saving me," Carl looked at her thoughtfully. "I think he is giving you a chance to save yourself. There is a difference." She thought about that a lot over the following days. Christmas came, and Vincent asked if she wanted to go to town for the church service. She said no, and he did not push. On Christmas morning, she found a wrapped package outside her cabin door. Inside was a pair of leather gloves, butter soft and lined with fleece, clearly expensive. The note said simply, "Your hands were cold. Merry Christmas, VF." She wore them every day after that, and when he noticed, he smiled but said nothing. Winter deepened, and the work continued. She fell into the rhythm of the ranch, learning its patterns and needs. She discovered she liked cooking for people who appreciated it, who left notes saying the stew was delicious or the bread was the best they had ever had. She liked the quiet of the cabin, the safety of the lock on her door, the knowledge that she was earning her own way. And despite all her intentions, despite all her fear, she found herself noticing Vincent Frost in ways that had nothing to do with safety or employment. She noticed how gentle he was with the animals, talking to the horses in a low voice, doctoring a calf with patience and care. She noticed how he always made sure Carl did not overwork his bad leg, taking on the harder tasks without making it obvious. She noticed how he never raised his voice, even when things went wrong, just got quiet and focused until he solved the problem. She noticed his hands, scarred and calloused from work, but somehow graceful, capable of fine detail. She noticed his rare smiles and how they changed his whole face. She noticed, and the noticing scared her more than anything had since Thomas died. In late January, a blizzard hit, dumping 3 feet of snow in 2 days and keeping them all housebound. Penelope ventured out to the main house on the first morning, struggled through snowdrifts up to her thighs, and arrived breathless and shaking with cold. "You should stay here until this passes," Vincent said, taking in her snow-covered state. "That trip is too dangerous right now." "I need to go back to my cabin," she said immediately, panic rising. "I understand," he said calmly, "but the snow is only going to get worse. Look, you can take my room. It has a lock too. I will bunk with Carl. You will be perfectly safe." "No," she said, already backing toward the door. "Miss Warren." He did not move toward her, just stood there with his hands visible, his voice level. "I am not going to hurt you. I am not going to touch you, but I am also not going to let you freeze to death trying to get back to your cabin. Please, stay where it is warm. I promise you, nothing will happen." Carl spoke up from his chair by the fire. "He is right, miss. I have seen blizzards like this before. You cannot go out in that again." She stood frozen, torn between terrors. Finally, survival instinct won out. "All right, but I keep the door locked." "Of course," Vincent said. "Let me show you the room." His room was neat, the bed made with military precision, his few possessions organized on a shelf. He gathered some clothes and his shaving kit while she stood in the doorway. "There is water in the pitcher," he said. "Extra blankets in the chest. Help yourself to anything you need. I will be out here if you need me." He closed the door behind him, and she turned the lock immediately, then sat on the edge of his bed, shaking. She could smell him in the room, leather and pine and something clean she could not identify. It was not unpleasant. It was, in fact, disturbingly comforting. She stayed locked in that room for 3 days while the blizzard raged. Vincent left trays of food outside the door 3 times a day, knocking to let her know, then retreating so she could open the door and take them without encountering him. He never tried to talk to her through the door, never pushed. He just provided what she needed and gave her space. On the second night, she lay awake listening to the wind howl and heard Vincent and Carl talking in low voices by the fire. She could not make out the words, but the tone was comfortable, companionable. She found herself straining to hear Vincent's voice, that low rumble that always seemed to settle something anxious inside her. By the third day, the storm was breaking and she felt restless, trapped in a way that had nothing to do with the locked door. In the afternoon, she unlocked it and came out into the main room. Vincent looked up from the book he was reading, surprise flickering across his face. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," she said, feeling awkward. I wanted to thank you for the room, for being patient." "You do not need to thank me for basic decency," he said. "Yes, I do," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them, "because it is not basic. Not in my experience." He set his book down carefully. "I am sorry for that. It is not your fault." "No," he agreed, "but I am sorry nonetheless." They looked at each other across the room and something shifted, some wall she had been maintaining cracked just slightly. "Would you like to sit by the fire?" he asked. "You do not have to, but you are welcome to." She hesitated, then nodded and took a chair across from him, close to the warmth. Carl was napping in the other bedroom, so it was just the two of them, the fire crackling, the storm finally quieting outside. "What are you reading?" she asked. He held up the book. "Shakespeare. A friend from Wyoming sends me books sometimes. I am not educated, but I enjoy trying to understand the language." "Which play?" "Much Ado About Nothing." She almost smiled. "That was my favorite before I married. You do not read anymore." "I have not had books, or time, or the heart for it, I suppose." He studied her for a moment. "You can borrow any of mine if you like. I have maybe 24. Not a library, but enough for variety." "I would like that," she said, and realized she meant it. They talked for an hour carefully about neutral things. Books, the ranch, the mountains, the differences between Montana and other places they had lived. It was the longest conversation she had had with him, the longest conversation she had had with anyone in years that was not purely functional. And when Carl woke up and she excused herself to make dinner, she felt lighter somehow, as though something heavy she had been carrying had been set down, at least temporarily. The next day, the sky cleared, and Vincent dug a path from the main house to her cabin. She moved back into her own space, but something had changed. She found herself lingering in the main house after meals were prepared, sitting by the fire in the early evenings, talking with Vincent and Carl about small things, daily things. Not every night, but sometimes, when the loneliness of the cabin felt like too much. February arrived with a brief warm spell and then more snow, and then slowly, tentatively, the first signs of spring. Vincent taught her to ride, setting her on his gentlest mare and walking beside her in the corral until she found her balance. He never touched her except to help her mount and dismount, always asking permission first, his hands brief and impersonal. She fell off twice, and both times he helped her up, asked if she was hurt, and waited until she was ready to try again. He did not laugh or make her feel foolish. He just patiently taught her until she could manage a walk, then a trot, then finally a slow canter around the corral. "You are a natural," he said, watching her circle past him, and the pride in his voice made her flush with unexpected pleasure. In March, he took her to town for supplies, and she saw how people greeted him with respect and genuine friendliness. She saw women look at him with interest, a few bold enough to approach and chat, and noticed how he was polite but never encouraging. On the ride back, she found herself wondering if he was courting her in his slow, careful way, or if she was imagining things, projecting her own confusing feelings onto his simple kindness. "Vincent," she said, and then stopped, not sure how to continue. "Yes." He glanced at her, his gray eyes attentive. "Why did you never marry?" The question was bold, probably inappropriate, but she needed to know. He was quiet for a moment, guiding the wagon around a muddy patch. I suppose I never found someone who suited me. And I never wanted to marry just for the sake of it. I figured I would rather be alone than be with the wrong person. What would be the right person? She asked, her heart beating faster. He smiled slightly. Someone honest, someone strong, someone who could be happy with a simple life in the mountains, someone I could trust and who could trust me. He paused. Someone worth waiting for. She looked away, her throat tight. That seems like a tall order. Maybe, he said, but I am a patient man. They rode in silence the rest of the way. And that night, alone in her cabin, Penelope let herself acknowledge what she had been avoiding for months. She was falling in love with Vincent Frost, and the realization terrified her because she did not know if she could survive being wrong about someone again. Spring came in earnest in April, turning the valley green, filling the air with the smell of wet earth and pine. The cattle grew active, and Vincent was gone for longer hours, riding the range, checking fences, preparing for calving season. Penelope found herself watching for him, listening for the sound of his horse, feeling disappointed when he came in too tired to do more than eat and fall into bed. Carl noticed, she knew he did. He would look at her with kind, knowing eyes and say things like, "Vincent is working himself too hard again," or, "I wish that boy would take a day to rest." She knew what he was doing, giving her openings to express concern, to acknowledge her feelings. She never took them, but she appreciated the gesture. In May, a late cold snap hit just as the calves were being born, and Vincent was out in the fields almost around the clock, helping with difficult births, protecting the vulnerable newborns from the cold. Penelope took to leaving hot coffee and food at the barn for him, which he would find and consume at odd hours. Once, she came out at dawn with breakfast and found him asleep in the hay, his coat pulled over a newborn calf to keep it warm. She stood watching him, this man who would sacrifice his own comfort for a helpless animal, and felt something in her chest crack open completely. She set the food nearby, pulled a blanket from the house, and laid it gently over him. He stirred but did not wake. She let herself reach out and brush a strand of hair from his forehead, a gesture so tender it made her eyes burn. Then she fled back to the safety of her work. When he came in that evening, he found her in the kitchen and said, "Thank you for the blanket." "You were cold," she said, not looking up from the potatoes she was peeling. "Penelope." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it stopped her cold. "I want you to know that you do not owe me anything, not gratitude, not affection, nothing. You have given me good work, and I have paid you fair wages. We are even." She set down the knife and finally looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I do not want you to feel obligated," he said carefully. "If you have feelings for me, I want them to be real, freely given. Not born from gratitude or fear or loneliness. You have been through enough. You deserve to choose what you want with no pressure." "And if I do not know what I want," she whispered, "then I will wait until you do," he said simply. "However long that takes." He left her there, and she stood staring at the closed door, her heart pounding, her carefully constructed walls crumbling around her. That night, she could not sleep. She paced her cabin, thinking about Thomas, about the years she had lost to fear, about the possibility of a different kind of life. Vincent had said she deserved to choose, but what if she chose wrong again? What if she was mistaken about him? What if she let herself trust, and he turned out to be just like Thomas? The kindness just a mask he wore until she was trapped. But even as she thought it, she knew it was not true. She had lived with Vincent for 5 months now. She had seen him tired, frustrated, angry at a broken fence or a predator taking a calf. She had seen him in every mood and moment, and not once had he been cruel or harsh or unreasonable. Not once had he used his size or his strength to intimidate. Not once had he blamed someone else for his problems or drowned his troubles in a bottle. He was, as far as she could tell, exactly what he appeared to be. A good man trying to live a decent life. And she loved him. God help her. She loved him, and the thought of telling him that, of making herself vulnerable, was the most terrifying thing she could imagine. But living the rest of her life in fear, never taking the risk, never reaching for the happiness that might be possible, that was a different kind of death, and she had been dying for long enough. The next evening, she did not go back to her cabin after dinner. She sat by the fire while Carl retired early, leaving her and Vincent alone. He sat reading, giving her space, not pushing. "Vincent," she said, her voice barely audible. He closed his book immediately, his attention on her. "Yes, I need to tell you something about my husband. About why I am the way I am." "You do not have to," he said gently. "I know, but I want to. I think you deserve to know." So she told him. She told him about Thomas, about the drinking and the gambling and the fists that came out when he lost. She told him about the fear, the isolation, the way she became smaller and quieter, trying to disappear. She told him about the relief when Thomas died and the guilt that came with it. She told him everything, her voice shaking but steady, getting it all out into the light. When she finished, Vincent sat silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I am sorry you went through that. No one should have to endure that, and I am grateful you survived it because otherwise I would never have met you." "I do not know if I did survive it," she said. "I think part of me is still back there, still afraid." "That makes sense," he said. "Fear like that does not just disappear, but maybe over time it gets smaller, maybe it gets crowded out by other things, better things." "Is that what you have been doing?" she asked. "All these months?" "Giving me time for the fear to get smaller." "I have been giving you time to heal," he said. "And to see that not all men are like the one who hurt you, and to let you come to me when you were ready if you ever were. And if I am not ready for a long time, if I am never ready, then we will be friends and colleagues," he said. "And I will count myself lucky to have that much." She looked at him, really looked at him, at the honesty in his eyes, at the patience in his face. "I am not completely ready," she said. "I do not know if I ever will be completely ready. I am still scared, but I am tired of letting fear make all my decisions." "What do you want, Penelope?" he asked quietly. "I want to try," she said. "I want to trust you. I am not good at it and I will probably be difficult, but I want to try." "Then we will try," he said. "We will go as slow as you need, and if it does not work, we will figure that out too." "That is not much of a guarantee," she said. "It is the only honest one I can give," he said. "I cannot promise I will never make mistakes or that you will never be scared. But I can promise I will never hurt you on purpose. I can promise I will listen when you talk and respect your boundaries and do my best to be worthy of your trust. That is all I have to offer." She stood, her legs shaking, and crossed the room to where he sat. He looked up at her, waiting, not reaching for her. She held out her hand. He took it carefully, his palm warm and rough against hers. "This is me trying," she said. "I see that," he said, his voice rough. "I see you, Penelope. I have seen you from the start." They stood there, hands clasped, the fire crackling beside them, and it was not a kiss or a declaration of forever. It was just a beginning, small and fragile and real. But it was enough. Over the next weeks, their relationship shifted into something new. They were courting, she supposed, though it looked different from any courtship she had known. Vincent did not press for physical affection. Instead, he asked her questions about herself, learned her opinions, sought her advice on ranch decisions. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers from the high meadows, a book he thought she would like from his next town trip, a pretty stone he found by the creek. They went on rides together in the evenings, exploring the ranch and the surrounding mountains. He showed her his favorite places: a waterfall hidden in the pines, a meadow where elk gathered at dawn, a rocky outcrop with a view of 3 valleys. She told him about her childhood, about her mother who died when she was 12, about her dreams of being a teacher before her father decided marriage was a better future. "You could still teach," Vincent said, "if that is what you want. There are children in Deer Lodge who need schooling." "Maybe," she said, the idea taking root. "Someday." He kissed her for the first time in late June, and even that he asked permission for. They were sitting on the porch of the main house watching the sun set, and he turned to her and said, "May I kiss you?" Her heart hammered, but she nodded. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed his lips against hers, gentle and brief. When he pulled back, she was shaking. "Was that all right?" he asked, concern in his eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "It was good." He smiled, and they sat together until the stars came out, her hand in his, the fear still present but smaller now, crowded out by something warm and bright that felt like hope. Summer passed in a blur of work and growing intimacy. Carl watched them with obvious satisfaction, making comments about how nice it was to see Vincent happy, how the ranch felt more like a home. Penelope moved more of her things into the main house, keeping her cabin but spending more evenings in the shared space, cooking meals they all ate together, joining in conversations that ranged from practical to philosophical. Vincent proposed in August, on a clear night when they were riding back from checking the northern fence line. He stopped his horse on a ridge overlooking the valley, the ranch spread out below them in the moonlight, and said, "I want to marry you, Penelope. Not because I think you need taking care of, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you. A partnership. A real marriage where we are equals, but only if you want that too." She looked at him, at his dear, familiar face, at the man who had proven himself day after day after day. The fear was there, it was always there, but it was quiet now, a whisper rather than a scream. "Yes," she said. "I want that, I want you." He dismounted, helped her down, and kissed her properly for the first time, deep and thorough, his arms around her, her hands in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she said, "I love you. I should have said that first. I love you, Vincent Frost." "I love you too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have loved you since the day you looked at me in Schneider's store like you were ready to bolt, but you stood your ground anyway. You are the bravest person I know." They were married in September, a simple ceremony in the Deer Lodge church with Carl and Sheriff Hendricks as witnesses and a handful of townspeople in attendance. Penelope wore a new dress, pale blue, that Vincent had insisted on buying her. She carried wildflowers from the ranch. When the preacher asked if she took this man, she said, "I do," without hesitation, and meant it with her whole heart. The wedding night was gentle, Vincent patient and careful, letting her set the pace, praising her, reassuring her, making sure she felt safe and cherished. She cried after, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that this was what it was supposed to be like, that she had survived long enough to find this, to find him. "I have you," he murmured, holding her close. "You are safe, I have you." "I know," she whispered back. "I know." They fell into married life with an ease that surprised her. Vincent had been right that he wanted a partnership. He consulted her on ranch decisions, valued her opinions, split the work fairly. They talked about everything, from finances to future plans to their fears and hopes. When she had bad days, when the memories came back and the fear overwhelmed her, he gave her space or held her, whatever she needed, never making her feel weak or broken. In October, she went to the schoolhouse in Deer Lodge and offered to tutor children who were struggling with their letters. The teacher, an elderly woman named Mrs. Foster, accepted gratefully. Twice a week, Vincent drove Penelope to town, and she spent afternoons helping children learn to read. It fed something in her she had forgotten existed, a sense of purpose beyond survival. By Christmas, their first as a married couple, she was pregnant. The realization filled her with terror and joy in equal measure. Vincent, when she told him, went pale, then grinned, then pulled her into his arms and spun her around, careful even in his excitement. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "You are going to be a mother." "And you will be a father," she said. "Are you ready for that?" "No," he said honestly, "but I will learn. We will learn together." The pregnancy was difficult, her body protesting, her fears manifesting in nightmares and anxiety. But Vincent was there through all of it, holding her when she was sick, reassuring her when she was scared, making plans for the future. They converted Carl's room into a nursery, Carl moving into the cabin cheerfully, claiming he preferred the privacy. They bought a cradle in town, and Vincent sanded it smooth, making sure there were no rough edges. In early June of 1884, Penelope gave birth to a son they named Samuel Thomas Warren Frost. The labor was long and hard, with the doctor brought from town and Vincent pacing the floor, helpless. But when it was over and she held their red-faced, squalling baby, Vincent beside her with tears streaming down his face, she felt something in her chest bloom into fullness. This was her family. This was the life she had built from the ashes of her old one. "He is perfect," Vincent whispered, touching Samuel's tiny hand with one finger. "You are perfect, thank you." "For what?" she asked, exhausted and elated. "For trusting me," he said. "For giving me this. For being brave enough to try." Motherhood transformed her in ways she had not expected. She was fierce and protective, watching over Samuel with an intensity that sometimes worried even her. But she was also softer, more open, the walls she had maintained for so long finally coming down. Vincent watched her bloom into this new role, and his love for her deepened into something profound and unshakable. Samuel grew from an infant into a curious toddler, stumbling around the ranch, fascinated by the horses and cattle, trailing after Vincent like a shadow. Carl doted on him shamelessly, whittling toys and telling stories. Penelope watched her son grow strong and happy, free from fear, and felt a vindication she had not known she needed. When Samuel was 2, they had a daughter, Lucy Eleanor Frost, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. She was calmer than Samuel had been, content to sit and observe, but with a stubbornness that made them all laugh. Vincent was besotted with both children, patient and playful, the kind of father Penelope had only dreamed existed. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch prospered, Vincent expanding the herd, hiring on more help as needed. Penelope continued her tutoring, becoming such a fixture in town that eventually they asked her to take over the school entirely when Mrs. Foster retired. She agreed, teaching 3 days a week, with Vincent supporting her fully, adjusting their routine to make it work. By 1890, Samuel was 6 and Lucy was 4, and Penelope was pregnant again, a surprise that made Vincent laugh with delight and her groan with good-natured exasperation. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do, her mind calm. In October, she delivered another son, James Vincent Frost, who had his father's dark hair and his mother's stubborn chin. Carl, now in his 60s and slowing down, declared James the finest baby he had ever seen, which he had also said about both previous children. "I am a lucky man," he told Penelope one afternoon, watching Vincent play with all 3 children in the yard. "I got to see you both find each other, and now I get to watch these little ones grow. Not many men get to see a family made from scratch like this." "We are the lucky ones," Penelope said, touching his shoulder. "You are part of this family, Carl. You always will be." The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. Samuel developed Vincent's love of the land, riding almost before he could walk, already talking about running the ranch someday. Lucy was quieter but sharp as a tack, reading everything she could get her hands on, declaring she would be a doctor someday. James was too young yet to show his path, but he was cheerful and affectionate, beloved by everyone. In 1895, 11 years after Samuel's birth, Penelope stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching Vincent teach their children to rope a fence post, their laughter carrying on the wind. She was 35 now, Vincent 40. They had gray threading through their hair, lines on their faces from years of sun and smiles. They had built this life together, brick by brick, day by day. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, coming up beside her after handing the rope off to Samuel. "About how far we have come," she said. "About that scared woman who showed up at the general store with nothing, and the man who was patient enough to wait for her to find herself." "I did not wait for you to find yourself," Vincent said, pulling her close. "I waited for you to trust that I saw who you already were." "And who was that?" she asked, leaning into him. "Someone strong, someone worth knowing, someone worth loving, even if it took her a while to believe it." She turned in his arms and kissed him, still amazed after all these years that she got to do this, that this man was hers and she was his. "I love you," she said. "I will never get tired of saying it." "Good," he said, grinning, "because I will never get tired of hearing it." Samuel called for his father's help, and Vincent kissed her once more before heading back to their children. Penelope watched them, her family, the life she had thought impossible for so long. She had had no reason to trust when she first arrived in Deer Lodge, every reason to stay closed off and afraid. But Vincent had earned her trust slowly, one gentle day at a time, proving himself through patience and kindness and unwavering respect. And now, standing here with the mountains rising around her, her children laughing, her husband's love solid and sure, she knew what it meant to be truly safe, truly home. The fear was not gone entirely. She did not know if it ever would be, but it no longer controlled her. She had learned to live beyond it, to build something beautiful in spite of it. "Mama," Lucy called, "come see what I can do." Penelope smiled and walked off the porch to join her family, leaving the shadows of the past behind, stepping fully into the light of the life she had earned, the happiness she had finally learned to trust. The years continued to unfold with a richness that still sometimes surprised Penelope. By 1898, the ranch had expanded significantly, and Vincent had hired 3 full-time hands to help manage the growing herd. Samuel, now 14, worked alongside his father with a seriousness that made them both proud and amused. He was becoming a man, tall and lean, with Vincent's steady temperament and Penelope's dark eyes. Lucy, at 12, had indeed pursued her dream of medicine with a determination that could not be deterred. She spent hours reading medical texts that Vincent ordered from back east, studying anatomy and disease with the same focus other girls applied to needlework. The doctor in Deer Lodge, an aging man named Dr. Carson, had taken her under his wing, allowing her to shadow him on calls when Penelope accompanied her to town. James, at 8, was the family's bright spark, full of mischief and charm. He could talk his way out of any trouble and into anyone's good graces. He loved the ranch but also loved people, spending hours in town when the family went for supplies, making friends with everyone from the blacksmith to the banker's wife. Carl had passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1896, at the age of 68. His death had hit them all hard, particularly Vincent, who had lost a friend and mentor. They buried him on the ranch in a spot overlooking the valley, and Vincent had carved a headstone himself that read, "Carl Thompson, friend and family, rest in the beauty you helped create." The loss had reminded them all of time's passage, of the preciousness of the days they had. Vincent became even more intentional about spending time with the children, teaching them not just ranch skills but life skills. How to be honest, how to treat people with respect, how to work hard and take pride in what you build. Penelope watched him father their children with the same patient care he had shown her all those years ago, and she loved him more for it, something she had not thought possible. In the spring of 1899, when Samuel was 15, he came to them with a request that surprised them both. "There is a rancher over in Wyoming," he said at dinner one night. "Mr. Anderson, who Pa knows. He has offered me a job for the summer working his range. He says it would be good experience learning how another operation runs." Vincent and Penelope exchanged glances. Samuel was young, but he was responsible, and the Anderson ranch was well respected. "What do you think?" Vincent asked Penelope quietly after the children had gone to bed. "I think he is growing up," she said, "and we have to let him. It is only a summer and you trust Mr. Anderson." "I do," Vincent said, "but I remember being 15. I remember thinking I knew everything." "And you had no one to catch you if you fell," Penelope said gently. "Samuel does. He has us, and he knows he can come home if he needs to. I think we should let him go." They did, and Samuel left in early May, promising to write every week. Penelope cried after he rode away, though she tried to hide it. Vincent held her on the porch and said, "He will be fine. We raised him right." "I know," she said, "but he is my baby." "He is also nearly a man," Vincent said. "And a good one, like his mother." Samuel did write every week, and when he returned in September, he was taller, browner, and brimming with stories and new skills. He had loved the experience and wanted to go back the next summer. They agreed, seeing how much he had grown, how much confidence he had gained. Lucy, meanwhile, had begun formally apprenticing with Dr. Carson, who had declared her the brightest student he had ever had. "She has the mind for it," he told Vincent and Penelope. "And more importantly, she has the heart. She will make a fine doctor if she can get the training." The problem was that medical schools did not generally accept women, particularly in the West, but Lucy was undeterred. "They will someday," she said, "and when they do, I will be ready." "We will make sure you are," Penelope promised, already trying to figure out how to make that impossible dream possible. James, meanwhile, had decided he wanted to be a lawyer, inspired by a circuit judge who had stayed at the ranch for a few days while holding court in Deer Lodge. "He helps people solve their problems without anyone getting hurt," James explained. "That seems useful," Vincent laughed. "You would be good at that. You have always been good at talking." "Pa," James said, mock-wounded, "I prefer to think of it as being persuasive." Their home was full of life and noise and plans for the future. Neighbors dropped by regularly, and Vincent and Penelope had become pillars of the community, known for their fair dealing and generous hospitality. The ranch was not just a business but a gathering place, somewhere people felt welcome. In 1901, when Penelope was 41, something unexpected happened. She realized she was pregnant again, 17 years after James. The realization shocked them both. "Are you all right?" Vincent asked, his face showing both joy and concern. "This is a lot at our age." "I am terrified," she admitted, "but also happy." "Is that strange?" "No," he said, pulling her close. "Not strange at all. This pregnancy was harder than the others, her body older and less resilient. Dr. Carson insisted on checking on her regularly, and Lucy, now 15 and already skilled, helped monitor her mother's condition. Samuel and James were protective, taking on extra chores without being asked. Vincent barely let her out of his sight, making sure she rested, ate well, and did not overwork herself. In early February 1902, Penelope went into labor a month early. It was a difficult birth, the baby small and struggling, and for a few terrifying hours, they thought they might lose both mother and child. But Dr. Carson and Lucy worked tirelessly, and finally, a thin cry split the air. Another daughter, tiny but fierce, with a cap of black hair and lungs that belied her size. They named her Catherine Rose Frost after both their mothers. "She is a fighter," Dr. Carson said, exhausted but smiling. "Like her mother." Penelope, weak but elated, held her unexpected daughter and wept. Vincent sat beside them, his hand on Catherine's small back, his eyes red. "4 children," he said, his voice choked. "We have 4 children. We are blessed," Penelope whispered. "So blessed." Catherine thrived despite her rough start, growing into a vibrant, determined child who had inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's patience. By the time she was 3, in 1905, she had the entire family wrapped around her tiny finger, particularly her older brothers, who doted on her shamelessly. Samuel, now 21, had taken over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, Vincent transitioning into more of an advisory role. He had grown into a fine man, steady and capable, with a kind girlfriend named Emma from a neighboring ranch. There was talk of marriage, and Penelope could not have been more pleased with his choice. Lucy, at 19, had been accepted to a medical college in Chicago, one of the few that accepted women. It had taken years of applications and appeals, but her determination and Dr. Carson's glowing recommendations had finally opened the door. She would be leaving in the fall, and while Penelope was proud, the thought of her daughter so far away made her heart ache. "I will come back," Lucy promised. "I will come back and practice here, help people who need it. This is my home." "I know," Penelope said, hugging her tight. "I know you will. I am just going to miss you." James, at 15, was indeed pursuing law, reading every legal text he could find, planning to attend university in a few years. He was charming and brilliant, with a sense of justice that ran deep. Vincent joked that James would either become a great lawyer or a politician, and he was not sure which was worse. "Definitely a lawyer," James said, grinning. "Politicians have to deal with too many people who do not want to listen to reason." "And you think lawyers do not?" Samuel asked, laughing. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that acknowledged time's passage and celebrated what they had built. Vincent was 50 now, his hair more silver than dark, his face lined but still handsome. Penelope was 45, softer around the edges, her hands showing years of work, but her eyes bright with contentment. They sat together on the porch one evening in the summer of 1906, watching Catherine play in the yard, her brothers indulging her in some elaborate game involving rocks and sticks. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked suddenly. "Taking that chance on me all those years ago?" Penelope looked at him, surprised. "Never, not once. Why would you ask that?" "Because I know it was hard for you," he said. "I know you were scared. I just want to make sure I made good on my promises, that I earned what you gave me." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You earned it every single day, Vincent Frost. You earned it slowly, patiently, until I had no choice but to believe in you, and you have kept earning it ever since. I have never doubted that I made the right choice. I love you," he said simply. "I will love you until I die, and probably beyond that too." "Good," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder, "because I am not going anywhere." Samuel married Emma in the spring of 1907, a joyful celebration at the ranch with half the county in attendance. Lucy came home from Chicago for the wedding, looking sophisticated and happy, full of stories about her studies. James gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure. Catherine, now 5, was the flower girl and took her job with utmost seriousness. The next year brought the ranch's first grandchild, Samuel and Emma's son, whom they named Vincent Frost in honor of the two men who had built the foundation of their family. Penelope held her grandson and cried, overwhelmed by the continuation of the family, by the legacy of love and work that would outlive them all. Vincent, holding his namesake with the same gentle care he had shown his own children, looked at Penelope and smiled. "We did this," he said quietly. "We built this whole life." "We did," she agreed. "Together." The years continued, bringing more grandchildren, Lucy eventually returning to Montana as promised and setting up practice in Deer Lodge, James attending law school and then joining a firm in Helena but coming home whenever he could. Catherine grew into a bright, determined girl who announced at age 8 that she would run the ranch someday. And Samuel, amused and proud, promised to teach her everything he knew. In 1915, Vincent and Penelope celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, and it seemed like everyone they had ever known came. There were speeches and toasts and laughter and tears. Samuel thanked them for showing him what a good marriage looked like. Lucy thanked them for teaching her that impossible dreams were possible with enough determination and support. James thanked them for proving that kindness and strength were not opposites. Catherine simply hugged them both and said, "You are the best parents ever." That night, lying in bed, Vincent pulled Penelope close and said, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked, though she was crying. "For trusting me," he said. "For trying even when you were scared, for building this life with me, for everything." "Thank you for being worth it," she replied. "Thank you for earning my trust, day by day, year by year. Thank you for being the man I needed, even when I did not know I needed you." They fell asleep holding each other, 30 years of shared life between them, years of work and worry and joy and love. The scared woman who had arrived in Deer Lodge with nothing was gone, replaced by someone strong and confident and deeply happy. And the patient cowboy who had waited for her to heal, who had proven himself trustworthy one gentle day at a time, had become the love of her life, the center of everything good she had built. As 1916 arrived, bringing with it the promise of more years ahead, more grandchildren, more seasons on the ranch they loved, Penelope Warren Frost looked at the life she had created and knew, without doubt, that she had finally found home. Vincent Frost looked at his wife, the woman who had trusted him despite every reason not to, and knew he was the luckiest man alive. And in the Montana mountains, in the valley where they had built their life, their love story continued, a testament to patience, to healing, to the transformative power of gentle, consistent love. Their story was not one of instant passion or dramatic gestures, but of slow trust earned and carefully tended, of two damaged people creating something whole and beautiful together. It was a love story written in daily kindnesses, in small acts of care, in promises kept and fears overcome. It was the kind of love that lasted, that built legacies, that changed lives. And it all began with a scared woman who had no reason to trust and a good man who earned it slowly, one gentle day at a time. Their children and grandchildren would tell their story for generations, speaking of the ranch that love built, of the great-great-grandmother who survived darkness to find light, and the great-great-grandfather who had the patience and wisdom to wait for her, to prove himself worthy of her trust. In the end, that was their legacy, not just the ranch or the family they built, but the proof that even when trust seems impossible, even when fear seems insurmountable, love can still find a way if given time and tended with care. Vincent and Penelope lived to see the 1920s, watching the world change around them while their love remained constant. They sat on their porch, older now, hands still entwined after 40 years of marriage, watching the sun set over the mountains they had made their home. "Would you do it again?" Vincent asked her, a question he had asked before and would ask again. "Every time," Penelope answered, as she always did. "I would choose you every time." "Even knowing how hard it would be at first?" he asked. "Especially knowing that," she said, "because I also know how good it becomes. How good we become together." He kissed her forehead, and they sat in comfortable silence, the kind only decades of love can create, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, their children working together on the ranch, the life they had built thriving all around them. This was their happily ever after, earned not through magic or fate, but through choice and effort and unwavering commitment. It was messy and real and sometimes difficult, but it was theirs, wholly and completely, and it was perfect.